Hello survivors and welcome to Now That's What I Call Survival Horror, the first aid spray show where we discuss the music of the survival horror genre, mostly Resident Evil, sometimes not, sometimes getting further and further away from Resident Evil arguably. My name is Si and joining me on this episode is Jordan.
Hello folks.
And we're doing some different stuff on here. We talked a little bit about Metroid across First Aid Spray canon, if you like, in the past. But we're always keen to do it a little bit more. But we've never talked about a Game Boy Advance game, much less ranked the music in it. So I'm really, really excited to get into Metroid Fusion, which is certainly the closest the series has ever gotten to a horror game. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Although you can just sort of, you get that from the very first sort of introduction and sort of tone. Super Metroid was already a lot of that, but yeah. I feel like Metroid Fusion only leans into it even more heavily. So it's very appropriate that we, sort of, if we're launching into sort of new territories with now, that Metroid Fusion is among the top of the list.
Right. Basically what Jordan is saying is I'm not allowed to do something like Viva Pinata without at least doing some horror adjacent stuff first.
Yeah, of course. Like, unless it's like John Carpenter's Viva Pinata. But, a man can dream.
Indeed. Okay, so the way that this show works, if you've not seen an episode of it before, Jordan has listened to the soundtrack of Metroid Fusion, picked his top 10 tracks and some honourable mentions, and ranked them from 10 down to 1. Of course, this is all subjective opinion, as all art, and particularly music, is, so feel free to disagree with Jordan's takes, I may or may not, as we go, and let us know down in the comments below your favourite picks and least favourite picks from the Metroid Fusion soundtrack, and where it ranks with the many great Metroid soundtracks as well. And as always, you can get episodes of this show early by supporting us over at patreon.com/FA Spray Pod. Jordan, I'm going to pass it over to you to start the show however you see fit, either with 10 or with something else.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll start with a little bit of sort of trivia, because I do like, when I come on to now, I like to sort of dive into the background of the composers and the people who work behind the game and stuff like that. It's always fun to sort of actually sort of take a dive and go into any kind of video game credits, because it's always surprising to me. It always feels like you'll never quite guess who worked on what and then worked on, the next thing afterwards.
Sure.
Like, they can often be kind of like quite surprising, even somewhat jarring. It's kind of like, wow, how did you go from writing music for that game to this game, completely different themes and everything. But obviously that's especially interesting when you're kind of like concerning Nintendo games, because you're very often sort of accidentally sort of tripping through a lot of iconic games and in turn a lot of iconic soundtracks, and realizing that actually the whole sort of industry, especially at Nintendo, is a lot more familiar than we tend to think. Is that while we can say, yeah, that it's got that Nintendo feel, it's largely because the same people have been working throughout all of those sort of generations of Nintendo. And in particular for the spotlight of Metroid Fusion is the sort of basically the lead composer, which is Minako Hamano. Now, she co-composed it with Akira Fujiwara, but I want to focus a little bit more on Minako Hamano just for a second, because it's very interesting to kind of dive back, sort of looking at her credits. So she actually sort of started out in Nintendo about 30 years ago, and the first credit that I can see that she composed was actually for the original Link's Awakening. And I played the remake just earlier this year. Absolutely love the soundtrack, and obviously a lot of that is owed to the original soundtrack from the Game Boy, and it's just sort of wonderful. But also she sort of co-collaborated with sort of a mainstay of Metroid music, and that is obviously Mr. Kenji Yamamoto. So basically they worked together on Super Metroid. Yamamoto-san he did the majority of the music, and then you had Minako Hamano, who's sort of like in as a sort of like the co-composer. So she did like arrangements and also additional themes. So like Meridia, the ending theme, Mother Brain, quite a few of these sort of like latter stage themes and that. And so obviously when it came around to 2001, 2002, they're both very busy, because Metroid all of a sudden was very busy again. So now you had Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime coming out in the same year, and if you're in North America, on the same day, which is just kind of amazing. They actually frequently collaborated together. So, as far as I'm aware, Yamamoto was the composer, obviously, on Metroid Prime at the time, but Hamano basically sort of, helped partly with the soundtrack Yamamoto obviously here is the sound director on Metroid Fusion, while Wano was the main composer. So I just thought it was really sort of interesting to sort of jump back and sort of, see what they'd worked on together in that. And they would continue to collaborate up until the end of the Metroid Prime trilogy, basically. So there's like a real solid block, a real sort of like established ground of what made Metroid music so distinct. And it is largely down to these two individuals the most, sort of why Metroid music sounds a certain way. And I think it's also like one of the strongest points for Fusion is that it was sort of taking that pedigree from Super Metroid and continuing it basically. And it ends up with a sort of like a wonderful product. This is really hard to actually come down to like 10 selections. I've got like a couple of honorable mentions, but to actually come down to like 10 songs was really tough. And I was surprised by that because it's no offense to the Game Boy Advance, but it's a Game Boy Advance game. You think sometimes that the hardware can sort of limit themes, especially when you're coming from the Super Nintendo, which had such a great chipset for music. But no, ultimately, if you are a great composer and you can come up with great themes, it really doesn't matter what you're working on.
It's really interesting because you talk about that history a little bit before we dive in, often being the composer and contributor and stuff like this. From my understanding, this is the only time that the student has kind of become the master and sort of led a Metroid project, so that makes it unique as well, from my understanding. And it's at least, of course, as you say, very unique because it's the most direct follow-up to Super Metroid there is, and also the only mainline Metroid game on the Game Boy Advance as well. So there's ticks a lot of interesting boxes there.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because it really does, I think in part because of the music, feel like it's really picked up where it left off. Was it Super Metroid 93, 94? And
94, I think.
And then going to 2002. It's quite a gap. In fact, back in the day, it would have obviously felt like a desert, the period of time between those Metroid games. And yet it didn't feel like they missed a beat. And that's what obviously, made Metroid Fusion such a sort of beloved title to so many people. To the point that I've heard so many people say that Metroid Fusion is their favourite Metroid game. Now, I think they're all just about up there. They're so like fine margins between the games. But it is a wonderful game, and obviously it's full of wonderful music. And, without further ado, we'll get into our first selection, which is kind of an easy one. It's the title theme. So, Metroid has had, quite a few different sort of opening themes before. They do actually have some variations, but, let's be honest, this is the Metroid theme. It's quite sort of straightforward, like, in terms of sort of the actual theme and the composition itself, but it's how it's sort of implemented, I suppose. There's obviously strong competition throughout the series, but I think this is a really strong one for actually sort of like what it's setting as a tone. What it's telling you about the game as a whole. I noticed that a lot of games that have used this theme, since Fusion, have kind of more emphasized the instrumentation of the notes. But what I like about Fusions is that it's sort of actually sort of like it's more of an emphasis on the counter melody that's going on in the background.
Yeah,
there's something sort of shadowy to that counter melody that sort of I think works really well, and. The other thing that sort of stands out about this, just like with Super Metroid, there's no sweet sort of second part to this theme. If you go listen to the original Metroid or Metroid 2, they both have these, lovely sort of airy sort of space themes, of sort of like, wonder in there, that are sort of meant to be more related to Samus. And there's not anything like that in this. In part because obviously you sort of like, you have a bit of a cold open with this game anyway, but I think that kind of works to its advantage because it just sets in more of that thriller tone. Basically, it's sort of this is not going to be safe from the outcast. Basically,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's simple, it's effective, and it's spooky.
Yes, I mean, I think that that sort of 6-note melody that is the Metroid theme is always quite mysterious and a little bit creepy anyway, but this really does, as you said, set the mood more than perhaps at least ever before, if not since. And you're right, actually, it's more about the space around those 6 notes, as opposed to something like the Prime games, which really feels like they really thought about how to emphasize those notes and the instrumentation of those notes, and those being the centerpiece. And they are the centerpiece here, but everything else is fleshed out around it. You know, there's these lower sort of notes. Yeah, counter melody is the absolute, I think, perfect way to put it, but it does sort of slide into a harmony at one point.
Yeah.
It comes in under that theme. It sounds like a sort of ghostly voice. Is really, truly sort of chilling stuff. You know, making scary music for the GBA seems like a laughable thing to do. But this is threatening. This is genuinely threatening, but also quite exciting. Like, I can imagine picking this game up for the first time as an established Metroid fan, having waited all that time, as you say, since Super Metroid, and being very excited to see what this game has to offer. It really, yeah, it goes to show what the system is capable as well. You know, as with any limited sound chip, really, when you give it to the right people, they can get some amazing stuff out of it. And, you know, we're going to talk about horror on the GBA or the sound of horror on the GBA, I'm sure. There aren't many games in the huge library of the Game Boy Advance, I think, that really try to even touch horror. And right from the off here, it's like, yep, this is what we're going for. So it sets the stage perfectly for me.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and I do like the fact that it's thematic. You know, that's sort of like the whole sort of creeping feel to it. Kind of ends up echoing sort of the whole subplot with SAX, and sort of, you know, the fact that you are in fact being stalked throughout the game. So
yes,
it's very ghostly and very spooky, and yes, great gravity to that title theme. Okay, so next up is Sector 1. So I actually, I first heard this in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, you know, an arrangement from, you know, all those years ago, and I always really liked it. It's interesting because it's not your typical Metroid theme, I don't think. Like, what I like so much about Fusion is the fact that where you are based is obviously almost entirely in a facility. While you have sort of things that are meant to represent biomes, and they slowly but surely sort of start taking over the facility in that kind of way, there is a different feel to this world compared to a lot of the worlds that you're sort of exploring when you were playing Metroid, you know, Super Metroid and the previous ones before that. And I really quite like that, because it's not planetoid, it's not trying to go for something entirely alien. And so this works very well, because it still feels, you know, ultimately like you're still largely in a safe area, but there is a little bit of tension going on. I mean, this Sector 1, which only otherwise has a name as like, it's a code name SRX, I think it is. It's meant to be like a sort of an SR388 you know, equivalent, basically. It's where obviously they feature a lot of the creatures from the planet, but ultimately it still ends up having those sort of facility vibes that work well with this. And so yeah, I mean, it's just sort of strong in that way, that it's building up a threat. There's a bit of sort of intrigue, but it's not immediately going into ultra creepy tones. We're saving those for later.
Yes. Yeah, it does have a sort of prickliness and a danger to it, but it's quite grounded, and unlike a lot of Metroid themes, I think when it comes to exploring areas, it's kind of driving as opposed to sort of, yeah, as you said, alien world noises and sort of strange stuff. It's kind of groovy, which is a weird mishmash, survival horror groove, but there you go. It suits the game's tone pushing you forward immediately. And for all the complaints about linearity in the game that some people have, it's not like the game was designed without that in consideration. I don't think there has to be a criticism that it is linear. Like, that in itself is not a criticism. And this piece of music, really works for it because it's driving, and it's a more active Metroid theme than most that we've heard up to this point. And as you said, I don't think the horror of the situation has remotely set in at this point, so it allows itself to be a bit more up-paced and a bit more fun, almost. Although that being said, there is a melody, and this has quite a long loop, this one, because it doesn't come in until about a minute and a half, but there's a weird sort of unsettling sort of change. It's just a little bit off kilter, and then the drum beat comes back in and you're like, oh no, okay, it's all right.
It has a little bit of a sort of like a horror theme house kind of
just a little
break.
peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see this so low in a way, because as you've pointed out, this one is the one that appears in Smash Brothers. I think I'm not sure. It may well be the only Metroid Fusion theme that has appeared in Smash Brothers, or it was certainly by itself for a long time, I think. Maybe not with Ultimate, because it's got all the music and the world in it. But this feels like the standout track from the game that everyone points to. And part of that is because it got featured in Smash Brothers and it's been remixed and covered by a bunch of people and stuff like that. But so it is would surprise me to see it this low. I really enjoy this, but I'm sure there's a lot more cool stuff to come. It absolutely deserves to be in the top 10 either way.
Oh yeah, I couldn't miss it out just because of how well known it is. I mean, this was actually the very first song that I'd been exposed to with regards to Metroid Fusion. It had to feature in some kind of way, and I like the fact that it is so sort of like different from some of the typical other sort of like famous Metroid themes, and so it kind of works to sort of Fusion's credit that it's got that sort of degree of diversity. That it's not to say that the other Metroid games don't have, it's just that they're not aiming for that. This was able to sort of utilize that sort of slow build narrative and through music, sort of as you go through a facility that is falling apart, and so obviously works very well in that regard. It's obviously a more subtle theme compared to some of the others. Speaking of, we'll go to our next song, which is Escape from the SAX. And I mean SA-X, obviously, not escape from the sax.
Yeah, that's how I read it every time.
So Metroid Fusion was actually just about haunted instruments. It's a terrible music store that's got haunted. Obviously this is not much of a theme, but it is a very distinct and memorable theme. This is the theme that I, quite frankly, sort of like associate with panic and terror and flight and dread, because it sounds like the most sort of like intimidating alarm clock in the world. It's like, you have to get up. You forgot to buy milk yesterday. It works very well for obviously the setting which it is, which is obviously all to do with the SAX, the X-Parasite that is taking on Samus's form and ruthlessly hunting her and, sort of basically becoming a bit of a stalker character. It's kind of a bit like sort of Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's sort of, they are fixed stalker positions, but when they happen, when the pursuit is happening, it is terrifying. Especially when you got that little D-pad on the Game Boy Advance and you're freaking and you're sweating, and it's scary, and that theme works so well for it. I really actually think that it enhances those encounters even more so than they were already very tense, but it just feels like it enhances it so much more. And a little note about this is that in interviews, Samana would actually pick out this song in particular and this theme in particular for people to keep their ears out for. So she's obviously quite proud of this. There are a lot of short themes in Metroid Fusion, a lot of which obviously which haven't made the list. They all work great, even if they're very short, but they're effective because, as we talked about, they sort of like, partly this is narrative driven, so a lot of these themes and tunes are only used once or twice, and obviously this was also used sparingly, but when it shows up, you remember it.
Yes, absolutely. Memorable is the first word I've got here. It's this absolute mania, isn't it? You know, it sounds more like threatening clown music to me than the theme of a super mutant alien.
It does.
So it's a bold choice, certainly, but I understand if you want something, odd, you want something off-putting. Obviously, it's intentionally grating. It's certainly stressful. So yeah, it really suits narratively where it's at. If you can get something so outside of everyone's comfort zone like this, then you've done well, because I don't think anyone would hear this and be like, yep, that's a Metroid theme, like out of context. It sounds like nothing else in the series. I don't think this is something that you'd ever listen to for fun, but it really, suits the purpose of putting your teeth on edge immediately. Yeah. So yeah, not much more to say on this other than just really effective at what it sets out to do. Even today, all the horror music is still weird and wonderful in its own fashion.
And it's somehow more frenzied and full of mania than a lot of the bosses in this game. I think that's what sort of like drives it so much, is because you can go through. We'll be talking about the next selection, which is sort of like more relaxing areas in certain ways, and then you'll have this come on, and it really does feel like that sort of like burst through the wall kind of energy, and very effective indeed. And partly the reason why it works so well is because there is a lot more of understated sort of like horror in the rest of the game, and there is a case of that in my 7th pick, which is Sector 4. So as I say, this is one of the more relaxed themes, but I mainly like it for the fact that there's a good balance of sort of those, facility sounds, while also sort of like, veering into the ocean biome that's going on. You hear it a lot throughout all of the sector themes, is that you keep being reminded that this is an artificial environment. There's a lot of sort of what is the word for it? The womp factor of the sounds. This is a terrible time to lose my words when I'm trying to describe music, but it's that sort of like the pulsating reactor kind of background bass that's going on, that just continually reminds you that this isn't like an entirely organic environment. And I do have a little bit of an issue with this, which is kind of weird because this is obviously number 7 in the top 10. I haven't really had much to say negatively about songs so far, but I did have to be honest about this, that I feel that for the environment that it was, and the boss that you fight, which is Ceres, and its theme is later on the list as well, it kind of feels a little bit incongruent. I feel like there maybe could have been a little bit more of a lead-in to that fight from this theme, because it's a little bit too relaxed. I like how relaxed it is, but maybe it's a little too relaxed for utility's sake. So that's the only mark that I would sort of have against it. But otherwise, it's very nice, and it sort of like plays into that kind of creepy sort of downfall theme that so many of these sectors have.
Yeah, I just talked about the last one doing stuff that Metroid's never done before. This also is kind of on the periphery of that. Like, this also sounds unique to the Metroid series up to this point to me. But also, again, this sounds like nothing else I've heard before. Well, not a lot else, actually. That seems like a rather extreme statement to make. But I can't think of much Game Boy Advance music that sounds quite like this. This reminds me more of, say, Parasite Eve, or even the Sega CD masterwork that is Snatcher, by the way. Any chance I can get to chuck that in there. It has sort of a like detective mystery kind of angle to it.
I can imagine that. I can sort of see that working. Yeah,
it helps that, you talk about the womp factor. This has got some serious bass on it. It feels like a Mega Drive track, which is, again, appeals to my tastes. It's got those dark sci-fi vibes. Feels very sort of late 80s, early 90s B-movie kind of thing. But yeah, it is lacking a little bit of a threat, but still I think it is quite underrated, really. I hadn't heard this in quite some time. So it was really nice to come back to this. It's such a full piece of music. It's the swells and rises in the background, as you talked about, the plinking and plonking arpeggios. It's quite simple, but it feels very well fleshed out. Whether or not it fits the environment, possibly up for debate. It probably could be tweaked a little bit, or for where it takes place, I should say, maybe at the pace of the game where you're at. But as a piece of music, you're right. It's just very nice to listen to.
So, number 6 is a completely different kind of theme. It's a boss theme, in fact. It is the Core X boss. You can't see it, but I'm totally dancing to this.
Me too, don't worry. Okay.
This is just plain funky. This had to end up on the list somewhere. This was almost like one of the very first picks that I had. I was like, I don't know where this is going on the top 10. I just know it's going in the top 10. It's funny because, again, this is one of these things where it's like, I think it's only used maybe once, which I find kind of like mad because I seem to sort of like, recall it being a different kind of thing where it's like maybe like used in every boss when you get to the sort of the Core X portion of it. But no, as far as I'm aware, this only happens sort of like when you are going up to a Chozo statue to get an upgrade, and then it sort of like, it fakes you out basically.
Yes.
It was pretending to be a Chozo statue the entire time, which I think this is why this theme works so well, because I feel like it emphasizes everything about the X-Parasite. It sums them up, basically. It's creepy and unnerving. Like, it's not pure horror, the X-Parasite. It's just the fact that it's so relentless. It will be, it will strengthen you, and yet it will fight you. It will sort of bring back enemies. It'll strengthen enemies. And, I'm so glad that Metroid Dread ended up sort of continuing the story with the X-Parasites, because I find them a fascinating enemy in the Metroid series, which is, it says something that they were able to sort of do that from Fusion onwards and sort of create a very compelling foe. But this theme in particular, it's just, I don't know, because it's so sort of like almost playful, it kind of throws you off guard. It's not pure terror. You're just kind of like, it's just weird. I like that about it, and I like how sort of much it sort of suits the X-Parasite down to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of landing in the direction of the point that I wanted to make about this is it, especially because as you talk about it, it's the moment where you get faked out a bit, and like, you think you're safe, and like, oh cool, I'm going to grab a helpful thing potentially. Haha, not so much, and it feels like it's laughing at you a little bit. And this music really suits it, sort of almost like its twisted sense of humour. Yes, it has a similar mania to the SAX escape theme that we talked about, so appropriately it all feels nice and connected. At this point we know that the X-Parasite and the SAX kind of have their own soundscape that's been established. I always appreciate that kind of thing. I also like that it's got a little bit... It holds itself a little bit back, it doesn't go too hard, but yeah, it's got rhythm to it this time around, and it retains its sort of strange otherness and mutating horror feeling. It's alien, it's parasitic, it feels intentionally strange. I'd really love to know what inspired that kind of choice of sound for the X, because it's so weird, and there's plenty of it on the soundtrack. As I said before, it doesn't fit with anything else in Metroid. Where did that idea come from? I think this potentially, this might be the most out there one of the X themes of all, because it funky. Like we were just talking about dancing to it. The other one is pure, in your face, time to be afraid something stressful is happening. This is stressful, but yeah, he's got almost a sense of humour about it, which is just so bizarre. I can imagine that if you play this game, if you were younger and you played this game, this would really scare you, this music jumping on and that thing coming alive, just because of how odd the whole thing is.
Oh yeah, like I mean that's the thing. It kind of really sort of throws you off. I mean this is like maybe the first or second time that you face a Core X, and yeah, this is obviously in its purest form in effect. And while there's lots of other themes, as you sort of say, that sort of like have almost like a corrupting factor to them, like there's obviously there's a reprise of the Ridley theme, which is another Hamano theme, by the way, and the sort of the corruption sort of aspect of something that is familiar, but there's something wrong, there's something off. It's not really Ridley. That's what sort of like works sort of so well. But yeah, here it's just a sort of a plain. No. This is what the X is about. It's going to weird you out. Basically, it's going to play tricks on you. It's going to weird you out, and then it's going to try and kill you. We've all had some of those people in our friends group. The playful X character.
It's interesting that you say that about the composer having. Being the person that wrote the Ridley theme. I didn't know that, and that's really interesting for the sort of, especially particularly the musical nerds out there. Ridley's theme quite famously is very I think it's in 5/4, so it's an odd time signature. And again, you get a lot of that throughout Metroid Fusion, especially with the X themes. They play an odd time signature. I've not really tried to think about what it is, but I'm sure it's not 4/4. They've got an odd sort of weird lurch to them. So I didn't realise that she also wrote the Ridley theme, and it all just sort of makes sense now. So there you go.
Yes, I mean that's the sort of the one sort of advantage with Super Metroid is that we know more about the sort of accreditation of the songs, basically per song per track, who wrote what basically. That is it's a little bit more foggy with regards to Fusion, although we can understand that Hamada was the main composer basically for Fusion. Yeah. So this was obviously there was sort of like a revisit of some of the themes that she'd obviously already wrote. Like it's very sort of like interesting kind of learn these things later on. That's the Core X theme. And again, another one of those sort of like short but effective, and it works extremely well throughout Fusion. Okay, so now we're going to get on to number 5, and this is Sector 3. So obviously we talked before about the Game Boy Advance and its hardware limiting what you can do in terms of sound, primarily. Because very often, as far as I'm aware, it sort of basically shared a bank on the CPU, so you had to kind of juggle between what you could do in a visual fidelity versus what you could do in audio fidelity, which could lead to very well-composed songs, ultimately having kind of really quite a cruddy output, and... I'm looking at Harmony of Dissonance from Castlevania in that respect. But this is one of those instances where I really feel like a fantastic atmosphere has been achieved despite the hardware. Like, it's surprising sort of how much depth you're able to sort of feel through this particular track when it was going through such awful audio hardware ultimately. And I think that is a credit to the sort of the technical aspect of obviously writing music for games as well, is that you're also writing it typically for specific hardware. You don't get that kind of privilege of many different instruments and high quality fidelity that you can obviously enjoy now. That was just the case back in sort of the older, now more retro game development. But I love the sort of anticipation throughout this theme. It's sort of more sort of like building towards something, and it works very well for what is effectively the volcanic fire biome, basically. This is a weird sort of point to sort of throw out, because it's not really about what it is, it's about what it's not. It's not Magmoor Caverns. I love Magmoor Caverns, but what I really like about Metroid Fusion is that it keeps the reuse of themes to a minimum.
Yeah.
The ones that it does use are very effective, but it doesn't try and nostalgia bait you, which I think is fantastic. It could have so easily have aped so much of Super Metroid to the point that it was just a Super Metroid tribute, and yet it did not do that. They decided that it should have the feet to sort of stand on its own, and it does.
Yeah, this is one of the most perfect examples of what you were talking about earlier to me when it comes to this is not a natural landscape. This is a space station with biomes, so it doesn't sound like Magmoor Caverns. It doesn't sound like a natural volcano. It sounds like a big pressure cooker. It's remarkable that they identified how to do that and how to achieve that. This sort of heaves and hums up and down like sweltering heat, like big machines giving off a lot of heat and hissing, and there is a constant sensation of discomfort in this to me, which is kind of what you were saying about anticipation as well. And the rest of the music that sort of plays over that sort of heaving, humming sound is actually quite akin to sort of late stage Resident Evil song to me, like a lab theme. The melodies that move in and out of that are very unwelcoming. You got clashes of percussion that could be parts of the station expelling steam or breaking apart under the pressure and stuff like that. It's exceptionally fitting for the area, and also I have to give it extra points since we primarily deal with Resident Evil. It made me wish we had a good Resident Evil Game Boy Advance game. Like, I'm kind of intrigued to see and hear what that would sound like now. But yeah, super underrated. Thematically speaking, it does a lot for building the atmosphere of Metroid Fusion's location.
Something I couldn't help notice with this track, though, is that is it me, or is there a theme, especially in sort of video games, of sort of a chorus for fire or volcanic style themes?
Yeah.
Like I was thinking back to sort of the Fire Temple in Ocarina of Time and Magmoor Caverns, of course, as we've mentioned, and that. I don't know what it is. It works really well. If you have some kind of, I'm even thinking of like Moria, like Bridge of Khazad-dûm in Lord of the Rings. There's kind of like
Sonic
having
Adventure
sort of this.
Does it?
Oh, really?
Yeah, or at least it does it for the stage Red Canyon, which is very it's pretty close to.
It's either something to do with caverns and caves, or it's something to do with fire, or it's something to do with both. But I just noticed, and I'd like other people to sort of point this out as well, because I swear there's a bunch of other examples of this. There's something where fire and some kind of like ghostly dwarven chorus in the background just goes together. I don't know why, but there you go. I just couldn't help but notice it, and that's a bit of an appeal to anybody listening. If you do have any other examples of that, they are out there. I want to know about them. Leave them in the comments, please.
Indeed. Big agree.
Okay, number 4, another boss theme. It's Ceres. This is a bop.
It really is.
So this somehow feels like both very Metroid and yet not Metroid at all. Like I feel like I could have transplanted this song into almost any other Game Boy Advance game, and it would probably work, better than in Metroid Fusion. But as I say, like it still ultimately has all of the kind of the feel of Metroid, but it's very funky in a very different way. It honestly, like, the thing that it reminded me most, it sounded like it was like a dance mix of an old Metal Gear 2 theme or something like that. I don't know, it's got some hard sort of like late 80s MSX encoded into it somehow. It's very thumping. I really like it. It kind of deserved a better boss, because I don't know, Ceres can be a little bit of a pushover, to be quite honest, but it is it works very well for obviously the environment. You've sort of been going through this sort of flooded biome with electrified water, and now you are taking on the sort of reincarnated remains of a big dragon snake. Is the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
You could listen to this theme and you say, oh, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, the drowned biome with the electrified water and the dragon snake. Of course it is. So yes, the boss is called Ceres, although YouTube says Ceres/Yakuza. I don't know if it has affiliates to any kind of crime families. Yeah. I didn't see any big back tattoo on it, so I don't know.
Somebody's got this as a back tattoo, that's what it is.
It's a very cool theme, and I knew this was going in the top 5 from very early on.
It's just straight up like a great little jam. We're really heating up at this point. This is really just a dance beat, but it does retain enough sci-fi for me to work. Got sort of like glistening machine noise in the background, and you've got some mysterious melodies that come into play every now and then.
Yes.
There is. It's less about the weird and more about the direct threat this time around, but there is that arpeggiated rhythm throughout. Still ties it together with the sound of SAX, and it's especially good through headphones. I have to point out, it really bounces all around you, so which is really, really nice. I mean, it's it's not a great boss fight. It's kind of a mad boss fight. It's sort of giant worm with a dragon head. And it's quick and it's hard to keep track of, so this sort of upped pace I think was absolutely necessary. It fits for me well enough, and even outside of the game it's just fun to listen to.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there as well, that the music bounces around you, which is exactly what Ceres is doing.
Precisely,
yeah. I'm over here, idiot. Come on. Alright, in third place, it is Final Mission. I just really like this. I think it's a cracking kind of final stretch theme, which is not typical for Metroid. You don't always get these kind of songs. Obviously, I think this is partly because it's more to do with the story. This is largely sort of played over a brief that you are getting from the computer, which sort of turns out to be Adam. Sort of basically sort of instructing you on the best way to sort of deal with the research facility and with X. And so it's kind of it's a nice little breather. It's sort of like, you're not quite done yet, but you have come so far, and the theme really kind of has a bit of a reflection feel to it. So you get to listen to this obviously as you go through sort of a lot of the cleared halls before you sort of get to the main room that you face SAX in. And yeah, I just really like this. I think it's nice to have in games, especially from like that period of the 16 to 32-bit, which did these themes so well, that kind of it gears you up for your last stretch. It's like, hey, it's going to be tough, but I know you can do it, and that's kind of what this theme says. So yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, this is a really good example of storytelling, via music, and in general, the power of storytelling without having a voiceover, and where you get that feeling from the on-screen dialogue between the AI that turns out to be Adam and Samus, and the perfectly timed playing of this music when he calls her lady, and you're like, it's funny you say about these sort of late-stage triumphant sounding themes in Metroid. They do come and go. Obviously, I think Super Metroid has one, and I'm trying to think if the original game /Zero Mission does as well, but they do stand out to me as having usually, quite triumphant final act or escape themes that make you feel quite heroic. But this one's a real kicker, I think, because it's paired with that real moment of humanity and that relationship between the two, however that you might interpret that. I don't have a lot. Just another good ending Metroid theme that matches with arguably one of the most important moments in Samus's entire character arc. And amidst all the alien noise that we've had up to this point on the soundtrack, as demonstrated so far from what we talked about, this feels really grounded, which makes it even more powerful. It's got no musical nonsense. It's just a good classic piece of music, you know.
There's no funkiness, there's no weird sort of like X shenanigans. Instead it's a lot of actual sort of like reprises of the leitmotifs from the beginning of the game. Sort of like taking on some of the earlier tracks when you're first just exploring the facility. It ends up sort of being able to sort of create a continuation of those motifs and turn them into something that is a bit more sort of conclusive. It's sort of like you have ultimately completed the majority of your mission. You really are, pushing on to the final stretch now, and it works great in that respect. So we're going to go on to second place now, and it is another very late theme. It's the epilogue. Yeah, this is, it's just, there's something warm and fuzzy about this. It just works so well. Obviously, it is an epilogue, so you have already done everything you've needed to do in the game. You've beaten all the big bads, you have saved the galaxy once more, and now you just get to sort of chill in your ship and sort of safely make your way across the galaxy and that. And if you have, I think if you've managed to save a couple of extra critters, you do get a few extra notes right at the end of this theme. It's technically in 2 parts, but you'll only know that if you've either beaten the game with or without that extra ending. I love this. The first 20 seconds really evoke something of Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds to me. Like it's the synth nature of it, in particular, sort of like the latter tracks of that album, and I absolutely love Jeff Wayne's work. And so it has that, and then it sort of breaks into a theme I can only sort of describe as that fuzzy feeling you get when you stayed up all night playing a game and you beat it at sunrise. That is just one of the best feelings that you can have. You just worked all night on a game, and you haven't got any sleep, but you don't care because you're finally watching the end credits on, another wonderful game that you're coming to the close of. And, there's not much more to say about it than that. Just that I think that they chose the absolute perfect note to go off with regards to the story. And, it works fantastic.
Yeah, having done the Now That's What I Call Survival Horror episode with you about Resident Evil Survivor and Dead Aim, I get the feeling that you like the rewarding emotional end theme.
Absolutely,
this is what this is. That first part, hadn't thought that, but brilliant sort of observation. The sort of second section of it feels quite military without being over the top, which I like. It sounds victorious, and sort of roots you back into Samus's life now that she's done with this experience. But it's also quite melancholic, and Samus obviously being a character that doesn't say a lot. As the player, we're sort of left to wonder what she's thinking and that kind of stuff. And you sort of get a wide berth of time to think about where she's at, what she's been through with the last experience and her mission, and what she, what's going to happen to her next with the choices that she made at the end of Fusion. I won't get into the spoilers. And as you said, it's especially poignant imagery-wise when you've got the sort of sleeping animals on board that you've rescued, thinking about right and wrong and stuff like that. I just talked about classical music. You can't get an orchestra on a Game Boy Advance, but you can see that that's the intention they're going for, and it comes across really well. They didn't overly complicate this. It's simple enough not to lose itself, but it does still feel very fleshed out, and I feel like it would transfer very well to a real orchestra. Because at this point, X is done with, and we've abandoned the sort of bleepy bloopy weirdness of it all, and we've just got the humanity of classical music, or the Game Boy Advance's approximation of it, left to close out the game. It's an incredibly appropriate way to cast off everything that's come before And we're just left in the big expanse of space with Samus. And so it's a wonderful way to end the game.
Until next mission.
Until next mission. But that's okay, because it was 20 years later. This is the last piece of music, anyone ever heard from 2D Metroid for like 18 years or whatever as well. So it especially hits you as well in that way.
Utterly wild to think of, and especially for people who played Fusion back in the day when it first came out. Imagine it was quite something when Metroid Dread sort of released and finally able to sort of continue that story. No more sort of prequels or sort of going back in time to before Super Metroid and stuff like that. No, we're actually got to see what happened after Metroid 4, Metroid Fusion as it's known. So before we get on to number 1, I have saved what I consider the best to last. I just wanted to mention a couple of honourable mentions because, as I say, this list was tough to try and shave down. But a couple shout-outs. Obviously, we mentioned before about Neo Ridley's theme. It is an established theme. That's part of the reason why it wasn't on this list. But it has so many weird, sort of funky X-corruptions going on in it that it's a really cool spin on Ridley's theme, which is, funny enough, I think it is Ridley's final appearance. So it's very interesting that you kind of like, you kind of feel a little bit of sort of tearing. It's kind of like, that damn Ridley's back again, but ooh. This isn't really Ridley though. This is some kind of corruption of it. So it works very effectively, and they managed to sort of make a good spin on it. It wasn't just another Ridley. It was quite different, and it worked. Staff credits also gets a shout out. I would have featured it, but it's kind of like 3 or 4 different themes, one after another, just sort of wedged in. And to be honest, it only really kind of, in my opinion, only really gets going about a minute in. It's a little bit too pomp and circumstance, military-esque sort of like for the opening part. But there are some lovely sort of like swooping spacey themes sort of like afterwards, which are more suitable sort of like for my taste. I did really like it, but just not enough to make it into the top 10. And this one is mainly the only reason I'm even doing honorable mentions. This isn't even really a theme. I just really like it as a track, and that was Navigation Room Ambience, I think is the name of the track. It is just bleeps and bloops from the navigation room, but if you gave me a 10-hour loop of that on YouTube, I'd probably fall asleep to it, because it's weirdly relaxing. So yeah, if this was about, music that's not really music, it might have made the list, but it didn't quite for that parameter.
We needed to focus on it because it's the closest the game has. Well, I mean, it is a save theme essentially, isn't it? It's like it's the closest to the Resident Evil save room theme. But Matt, I mean, just to say about that one, incredibly memorable because of how relieved you feel to be in a save room, but how completely unsafe it makes you feel. For me, I don't think I could sleep to this personally, but props to you.
It's those little sort of bleeps and bloops in the background which ended up being referenced in Metroid Dread's save theme. So I like that because it was one of those things where somehow you could sort of reference that to Metroid fans, and they know exactly what bleeps and bloops you're talking about. It could have just been some background noise. I noticed that Fusion is just generally quite good with its ambience effects. There's a lot of tracks which actually are partly enhanced by having the sound effects layered on top of them, because that's ultimately how they sound in game, and they work so much better in that way, to sort of just boost the ambience of the surroundings through the music and the effects. It works very well. But without further ado, my number 1 track, this is the track which I would put out there and say, this is Metroid. Like, if I had to make an utter shortlist across the series, this is Metroid. Wow. And so if people haven't guessed it already, it's Underwater Depths. It is far and away the most atmospheric of the themes in Metroid Fusion, and it sits up there with the greats of the series in just being able to sort of build a world. Crazy thing is that you don't even spend that very long in this section. As far as I'm aware, you only really sort of like maybe visit it once. And yet it stuck with me long after playing the game. Just absolutely love it. It's Metroid at its sort of sci-fi thriller best. This is the kind of music that I want to show to people who've never played Metroid, that this is the kind of music that you would sort of like expect from it. It's very sort of somber and haunting. It just works really well. And despite the fact that it is sort of so haunting and unnerving, it's also very relaxing. And it's very, very strong, and I think that it shows that we're talking about a pedigree that sort of came from Super Metroid.
Yeah.
And in particular, we're talking about the composer who also wrote themes for stuff like Meridia, and the Wrecked Ship. So it works in that way that we're talking about locations that have a sort of a past feel to them. There's something that's been sort of like lost and washed away or sank to the bottom, and it's very effective for the environment that it's in. But you can listen to this without knowing anything about Metroid Fusion, and it is a very effective theme. And that's why it's my number one.
So, water themes in video games, always never miss, really. And Metroid is certainly no exception to that. But this is so good. The first minute, it's just sort of beautiful ambient sounds for about 50 seconds or so. But then it's when it really kicks off and you get those low strings and the melody comes in. And just, honestly, this is one of those pieces of music that I like to not hear for a long period of time, so that I can just envelop myself in it again and just think, wow, it's so simple, but it's so effective. It's dangerous, as you said, it's somber, it's sad, it feels isolated, it feels like lost, yet there's still determination in there. What a brilliant melody that's given centre stage, and it's given the centre stage that it needs, in fact, but it doesn't overcomplicate anything. And the part of the game that it's in reflects those feelings. Like you say, I think it's been a while since I played Metroid Fusion, but I think it does just take place kind of in one area that you're not in all that long, unless you get a little bit lost. I seem to remember there's like a hard to find bombable wall that you need to morph ball your way through or something. So I remember hearing it the first time I played it quite a lot, because I was like, where do I go? But I didn't really mind, because it was, exceptional piece of music. Really underrated among the water theme genre, and something that Metroid needs to do. We talked, you mentioned earlier about your nostalgia bait tracks, and we talked a little bit about the Ridley theme, which is the big one on the Fusion soundtrack. It's almost in your face about it. It's so bright that it's like, remember this one, and that's okay. But the series needs to rehash this at least once, or do something interesting with this again. I love when Metroid Prime brings back the Brinstar Depths theme. I think it's Metroid Prime 2 in Torvus Bog is one of my favourite Metroid soundtrack moments. And Metroid 2, the remake, the soundtrack for that game was mostly made up of remixes of Super Metroid themes.
Yeah.
I really would like them to do obviously more with Fusion's soundtrack overall. But man, this one just feels so unfairly looked over, because this is, it's not as relaxing as something like Dire Docks, but it's of the same quality, and it should be talked about equally as much as that, but obviously in a very different conversation, because it's a completely different mood. We've had a lot of number ones in the show so far that are storyline relevant, or big and bombastic orchestral, boss fights and impressive stuff. This is just simply an incredible composition that makes you forget that you're listening to a Game Boy Advance sometimes as well.
And with that, you couldn't have said it better. I really don't think I can add anything to that, Si. Just a wonderful, wonderful number one, if I say so myself. I did make the list. And that's it. That is my top 10 of Metroid Fusion.
Fantastic.
How did you think that went, Si?
I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I would be in agreement. I think you picked the right number one. Did that come across? I think that came across. But
do you think we should maybe do more Metroid in the future?
Right. Let us know if you'd like to hear us talk more about Metroid soundtracks. What other games outside of Resident Evil as well would you like us to cover on the show? Because it's a conversation that, behind the scenes we often talk about. We're going to obviously continue to talk about Resident Evil soundtracks on Now That's What I Call Survival Horror that we haven't. But it's fun to mix it up every few episodes and do something different, and there's a whole universe of games out there for us to sort of wade into and discuss. So let us know what you thought of this episode. Let us know what you thought of the Metroid Fusion soundtrack down in the comments below. And again, you can hear episodes of this show early by supporting us at Patreon, patreon.com/FA-SPRAYPOD. Jordan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening, and have a good week.